Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're really pleased to have the chairman of the Agricultural Committee in the House of Delegates with us, Danny Marshall. Good to see you, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Woody. Thanks for doing this. This is it's always a real treat because people back home actually watch this, and so it.
That's wonderful to hear.
I get comments about this, good comments about this.
Great, great. Well, tell us a little bit about back home, Danville, Pittsylvania County. Now, I understand statewide the unemployment rate is less than 3%, but Danville and Pennsylvania are still struggling, as I understand it.
Well, they are compared to where we were, maybe just right after or right before NAFTA hit our area very, very hard.
North American Free Trade Agreement.
That's right. Thank you. And so our citizens would know what NAFTA is.
Yes.
And so this past year, and we had a large announcement over in Henry County. A Polish company that's going to make structural glass for high-rise buildings, and they should start construction of that building in Commonwealth Crossing Park, which is right on the Virginia-Carolina line on 220. We had some additional companies that did expansions of jobs. In Danville, Pittsylvania County, we had another company from the UK come and announce a location in our area. So we've had about 4 of those companies from the United Kingdom that's come over. The reason they're coming is because at Danville Community College has a wonderful program on precision machining. They're graduating about 80 to 100 people a year, and this time of the year, those young men and women tell me that they are starting getting offers, the people who are graduating. So they get multiple offers, and so those companies are coming from outside of our area to Danville, Pittsylvania County because of this. Is because it's everybody's got land, everybody's got water, sewer, but it's a workforce, a qualified workforce that makes a difference, and it's working. So.
What about agriculture in Pittsylvania County? And agriculture is a huge economic driver throughout the state.
So agriculture in the state of Virginia is still the #1 industry. I think forestry is number 2, either number 3. But in Pennsylvania County, agriculture is still #1. Tobacco is probably still king. It's not as big a king as it was, a few years ago. People here in the states are not smoking as much, but we have most of it, all of it, I guess now is all contract farming, where a lot of this tobacco is going overseas. So it's going to Japan, it's going to China, it's going to other places.
What about the Tobacco Commission? It still plays a critical role, doesn't it?
Yes, it's and I'm a member of that, and so anybody who's watching this, if they see former Senator Charles Hawkins or either former Delegate Whit Clement, thank them because they were the ones who brought this idea and got it passed back in the late 90s, and so it's hardly an economic development project that goes by that the Tobacco Commission doesn't have some play some hand in it. But it's also in education. Senator Frank Ruff is chair of the Education Committee, and so we have a budget of about $12 million a year for education. We target what is the areas that need employment in. So if we see something that employers are having problem filling those jobs, then we will give scholarships along those lines.
So I take it you're able to not only train people with these new entities coming in from abroad, but there are jobs in the immediate area for them.
They are, and I use a baseball analogy, and so we are getting a lot of singles right now. But you can win baseball games with singles, and like these companies I mentioned earlier from the UK, they are about anywhere from 35 to 45 employees and about $10 million or so in capital expenditures, which is a good base hit. Good, solid companies really take care of their employees, and just good corporate citizens. The kind of companies that we need to rebuild our economy.
What about the production of industrial hemp? I know there's been a move to legalize that.
Well, I actually have a bill that was heard yesterday in subcommittee, and so it passed subcommittee yesterday. We got a full committee on Wednesday, and when the federal government passed the federal farm bill, it decriminalized hemp. And so we set up a meeting this past December. I, along with Delegate James Edmonds over in Halifax County, Secretary Ring, people from Farm Bureau, people from VDAX, people from a local Pittsylvania County farmer was there, people selling crop insurance. And what the whole goal of this is, I wanted to make sure that there were no regulations or code that would get in the way of growing and processing hemp. If you look at, I talked to the people in that business that North Carolina and Kentucky are already ahead of us. And so what we did is a bill that I took is going forward is kind of based on the tobacco model, where you had growers and you had processors, and then you had people who made a product. And so the bill that I have that's bringing forward, along with a lot of help, we had a lot of people working on this, that will use that same model. So we'll grow it and then we'll process it. But the next thing we're going to do is we got to figure out how we can make high value products out of it. In Europe, several European car companies are using hemp to make the dashboards, the side panels of cars. And so the flower at the very top of the plant can be used to make different types of pharmaceuticals or either cosmetics. I mean, they can make lipstick out of it or that type of things. And so we want to be able to make all of that. We want to make it here in Virginia because it's another crop that our growers can grow. And so our farmers are pretty excited about this. And so I think that it will help really all of Virginia, but it's really what I hear from the farmers that if you can grow tobacco, you can grow this hemp also.
Tell us a little bit about coal ash. There has been the last couple of years a debate about how to deal with that problem, and I know that's gone through your committee as well.
So what happened is several years ago, upriver from Danville, in Eden, North Carolina, they had a coal ash pond adjacent to the Dan River.
Now, what is coal ash?
All right, so coal ash is when they burn coal to produce, basically produce steam that turns a turbine in a generation facility. And they make the coal about the consistency of a face powder and blow it into a boiler. What is the unburned part is called coal ash, basically which goes up the stack. They capture that and they have to do something with it. So what they have done with it in most locations is they have a pond on their site, and that coal ash is stored on site. They usually put it underwater because it's again, it's about like talcum powder. If it didn't, it would blow everywhere. So what happened in Eden, North Carolina, upstream from Danville, is that there was a pipe, there was a parking lot on the other side of the coal ash pond, and there was a pipe that ran under the coal ash pond. It was a metal pipe, rusted in two, and the coal ash went into the pipe, then went out into the river. And so the Dan River, the majority of times, is called the Muddy Dan. It looks about like the top of your desk, but this time it was gray. And so it was gray from Eden all the way downstream to South Boston. So that got a lot of people in the General Assembly concerned about other locations. And so we had a bill last year to study this, and so Delegate Kilgore, chair of Commerce and Labor, appointed me as chair of that, and Tony Wilt and I served on there because both of us were in the concrete business. Tony still is, and we use fly ash in the manufacture of concrete. So, long story short, we met over the summer 3 to 4 times and looked at either recycling or either to put it the material in a lined landfill. So what the bill that's coming forward, one in the House, one in the Senate, will look at the sites that are in the watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, and will put those move that material into a lined landfill.
I take it that's going to be an expensive proposition, however.
It's $3 billion.
$3 billion.
$3 billion, and so it's anything when you have that much material to move. It is it's a big task. Now the one here in Chesterfield, just south of us in Richmond here, they'll keep this ash on site. They will make a new lined landfill at a high point on that property and move the ash from the existing pond up to the new one. And one of the problems is that if they would have had to take it off site, it was 300 truckloads a day.
A day.
15 years.
Wow.
That's 300 going this way. You got 300 coming back this way, so that's 600 really. And so the way they're going to do it now is they'll be able to use off-road equipment, and they won't have to go onto public roads, and so it won't be disruptive to the neighborhood.
Can that coal ash be used for any other purpose?
It can. It's used for quite a few things. That the coal ash out of those ponds, there's a process that they can make it cleaner, so to speak, and use it in the manufacture of concrete. There's a site near Danville over in North Carolina that they use to make sheetrock out of it. There's a company up in Baltimore that can take it and make pavers, concrete pavers with it. And so and there are some other things, but they're probably the largest volume of it. But even if you take all of that, it still would be many years before you use it all up. So the bill that's coming forward says that at least 25% of the ash, shall be recycled if economically feasible. So that will help, because when you talk to Tony Wilt, Delegate Tony Wilt, he'll tell you that sometimes there's problems getting ash, and so this would be able to help that industry out.
Your committee has jurisdiction over the Chesapeake Bay that you mentioned. What's the state of the Chesapeake Bay now?
I think it's in good shape. If I listen to the people who live there, one of the things that that people, back in my area, where I'm a couple hundred miles from the Chesapeake Bay, but is oysters are not only a great product for Virginia to sell, but they also are a filter that they clean up the bay, and oyster production is up, the bay is cleaner, so it's a win-win. The watermen out there get to sell more product in oysters. We as consumers get to eat those wonderful oysters, but it also cleans up the bay, so it's working.
Pharmaceutical processors, I know you have some legislation dealing with them. What's that all about?
Well, so last year we passed a bill that for processing, basically it was it could be marijuana, legalizing marijuana oil, not the smoking of marijuana. But the problem that you always find these unintended consequences. And the problem is that if the legislation says that if you have been convicted of a drug offense, you cannot work in this industry if you're a Virginia resident. Now, living in Danville, Danville butts the North Carolina line. So if you live in North Carolina, you can, and you have an offense in North Carolina, you can come into Virginia and work. But if you're in Virginia and you have an offense, you cannot. So what the bill does is says that if you have not had an offense in 5 years and you can work in this industry. Now, the industry also has got to have a drug policy and do drug testing. So I think the issue is just trying to make it fair for Virginia citizens to work in this new industry, but also we want to make sure that people get clean and stay clean.
Sure. We were talking earlier about how busy it is, 45, 46 days this year. It seems even busier for a short session, but apparently some of that has to do with the changes in the tax law from Washington, D.C. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So what's happening is the federal government, Trump's tax plan was passed, I think it was last spring, after we left here. And so that if we don't conform to that, in the past, Virginia conformed to the federal law, so we were able to take those deductions. We have to have a bill to do that, and so that will be on the House floor probably this week, and to conform so that if you itemize your taxes, then you'll be able to take those deductions. And so it's a great middle class thing that to help those people that hardworking Virginia citizens. And so that should pass this week.
So I guess what happened was that the federal government increased the standard deduction for an individual to, I believe, $12,000, and two married couples to $24,000. Right now, current law in Virginia doesn't allow an individual to take a standard deduction on the federal side and itemize on the state side, as I understand it. And the standard deduction on the state side pales in comparison to what the federal standard deduction is now.
What have you done your homework? So you're exactly right. And so this once we pass this, that it will help help the citizens of Virginia to use to keep the money that they work for, and not send it down here so we can spend it.
And apparently there is some debate about the governor's proposal for the use of part of the windfall with reference to what's called the Earned Income Tax Credit. He wants to use quite a bit for that. As I understand it, the Speaker has basically put all of these tax-related matters into the Rules Committee, which you are a member of. And the latest proposal I saw basically said, let's go ahead and conform. Let's put that money aside. That's part of, that's the windfall, and let's decide maybe in a special session, a one-day session, how we're going to deal with that.
That's what I understand also, that we'll probably come back sometime this fall. I think that Appropriations Committee is supposed to do some homework after we leave here to see how we should, that money that's in that lockbox, where it should go to. But in the meantime, we will have a bill that we'll vote on this week, so that it's called an emergency bill. So once we vote on it, if it passes, it's got to have 80 votes. If it gets 80 votes in the House out of 100, then it becomes law, and so that people can file their taxes this year, because it's that time of year, tax time.
Right. Threat assessments in our schools. I know that you're pursuing something along those lines.
All right. So last year, after the tragedy in Parkland, I went to the Speaker and asked him to look at putting together a special group for to do assessments of all of the school regulations on school safety. So long story short, he did that. It's called the Select Committee on School Safety. He appointed himself chairman, and I'm glad he did, and I am vice chairman. We broke up into 3 different subcommittees and work groups, and so then there were 22 of us, proportional seating, just like every other committee. That was 12 Republicans and 10 Democrats. He put the chair of House Appropriations, the Money Committee, the vice chair of House Appropriations, the chair of Education Committee, and the chair of Courts Committee. And so we met throughout, I guess we probably met maybe 10 times this past year, and really found out some really interesting things. I think under Governor McDonnell, they had set up a similar type of, but didn't go quite as far as we did. And so Virginia is really at the forefront of school safety. And one of the things that for the citizens watching this that we heard over and over, the safest place for a child today is in a school. You're 20 times more likely as a child to get hurt in a restaurant than you are at school.
In a restaurant.
In a restaurant. But we brought a lot of bills forward. One of them is, for example, we heard about school counselors, that school counselors are trained to see a problem with a student, and to hopefully try to fix that problem before it escalates. But we heard a number of times that school counselors in some schools were testing coordinators, and so they were being, the majority of the time, was coordinating testing. So we turned that around and said that there's a bill that one of 24 bills that we brought forward along these lines, that said if you're a school counselor, that 80% of your time has got to be school counseling, and 20% of the time you can do other administrative work. But the whole point of this is we want to try to fix those problems, because that's one of the things we heard over and over as we went to different schools around the state of Virginia, is that some schools are doing a wonderful job as far as my phone's ringing. So some schools are doing a wonderful job as far as already doing this, as far as school counseling. And so we want to make sure that every school is doing that. We also did some other some of these things are just really kind of common sense, that there are called threat assessment groups in schools. And so one of the things, as we said, is that if you're going to have a threat assessment team, you probably ought to have the sheriff or the police involved, and probably fire prevention there, so that they would be part of a plan. So if God forbid anything like this happens, the first time they walk in that school is not under these situations, so they know this to start with. Other one we heard about was school resource officers. We are funding additional school resource officers and one of the things we heard over and over again is those school resource officers become part of the school, get that personal interaction with those students. Again, we've heard sometimes where some students have gone to a school resource officer and said, you just need to watch so-and-so, something could happen, and luckily nothing has happened. But the other issue is trying to find additional school resource officers, is for retired police officers. And a problem with that in the previous laws was that if they were to work in a school system, their retirement would be upset, and so they couldn't do that. So we changed that also. So a lot of really common sense type of issues like that.
Now, we had a lot of teachers in Richmond yesterday, and I understand that there will be some sort of pay raise for those teachers. What impact, however, does that have on local school districts? Aren't local school districts responsible for coming up with part of that pay raise?
Yes, it is. And so I haven't heard the details of this, but usually it's if the state puts up $1, there has to be a $1 match in localities. And I know and sometimes several years ago that one of the counties that I represent couldn't do the match, and so they were not able to do so. So I think that there's going to be language that maybe kind of works around that, so that they don't have to come up with a full $1 match. But what is being offered is a 5% pay increase for teachers.
Now, what about other resources in school districts? What about nurses? I've heard that there's a dearth of nurses in most school districts now, and they are needed just as much as a counselor, for example, or a school resource officer.
Well, and especially like in my part of the state, where you have people living at the poverty level, that school nurse is a lot of times the only medical person that they see, and so that it's important. And in my part of the state, where we, I tell people all the time that if you go to Loudoun County, there's the top 5 richest communities
Yes.
in the nation. 4 of them in Northern Virginia, and most of them are $115,000 above income. My part of the state, household income is in the low, about about 35,000. So that's a long ways, from where one to the other. So one of the things we're trying to do is to create additional high-paying jobs. Takes more skills for these jobs, but so people will be able to provide for their families and to provide for their that they would be able to. They wouldn't have to depend on that school nurse to be able to go to the doctor.
What about the opioid crisis? Has it hit your district?
It hadn't. It probably has hit west of my district. I don't have Marshall, but I have Henry County around there, and it's probably I hear about it more over there than I do in Danville. Martinsville at one time had the highest percentage of opioid prescriptions that were written in the state per capita. So there's a lot of problems, and we've heard that people are doing some really awful things. I mean, they're going out hurting their pets so they can go to a vet and get opioids, and so everything I hear that it is really addictive. That my wife had surgery, and that was one of the questions we had. What's a pain pill? My grandson had surgery, a year ago, and that's one of the questions we asked. What pain pills is he going to have? We don't want opioids.
Exactly.
And so I had nasal surgery a few years ago, and same question. And so anybody who's going out and having surgery, you need to have that conversation with your doctor, and if you can find an alternate type of a prescription, you probably just don't want to take the opioids to start with. So in case you don't want to get hooked on these things.
Complicated subject, got about 30 seconds left, but I wanted you to comment on the bills that are going through now regarding redistricting. There's one on the Senate side that just passed, and I think there's one that's just been introduced here on the House side.
So Delegate Cole is putting in a constitutional amendment that a constitutional amendment has to pass this year, then it has to have election, come back and pass next year. And what this would do is set up a bipartisan Republicans, 4 Democrats, and from the House, and 4 from the Senate, and they would get together and draw the lines and bring those back to the General Assembly.
And that would be an up or down vote by the General Assembly.
Yes, and so if what I read, if the General Assembly does not vote for that, then it goes to the State Supreme Court for them to draw the lines.
Great. Well, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you, Danny Marshall.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.